Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
We've fully addressed that, but John Ossoff refuses to disavow these Democrat socialist movements in our country. John Ossoff should answer for why he supported ending cash bail, why he supported the open borders, why he supported these radical anti-Israel extremists.
Republican U.S. Senate candidate Mike Collins talking to reporters yesterday for the first time since news broke about a week and a half ago about his son-in-law's involvement and social media postings involvement in the white nationalist movement. I'm Rick Fuldem along with Doug Reardon, and this is the On the Record podcast, the companion podcast for our Sunday program On the Record, which airs on Atlanta News First and streams anytime on all of our streaming platforms. And Doug, we heard the response, or really, I guess, the non-response to your question. You were the one that posed this, and this is really the first time that the congressman has faced reporters since CNN broke the story about his son-in-law back in the middle of July.
Yeah, I think it was July 16th or 17th when this first came out, CNN making this connection between Collins and his son-in-law. Of course, they have a connection, a man by the name of David Allen Shear II. And he has been an online influencer for a long time. He's done some fitness content. He has done some motivational content. But in the last couple of years, really, he has moved over to echoing this white nationalist and even at times anti-Semitic message in his videos. He is very open about the way he feels about Jewish people. He is very anti-Israel, and he has stated things like, if you are not of white European descent, you're not American. Those are some of the multitude of references we saw him make and heard ourselves as we watched these videos to the white nationalist and anti-Semitic movements. And of course, when this came out, Collins, his original statement, which was not done on camera, it was not done in any sort of interview, it was just kind of blasted out to outlets that asked about it. He said he has consistently voted with Israel, with pro-Israel policies, and that he denounces anti-Semitism no matter where it came from. But there was no addressing of his son-in-law directly. And so yesterday was the first time that Collins had held any sort of media press conference to actually address this. He was out in Forsyth at Monroe County Hospital talking about rural healthcare. He came out to a podium that was sitting outside. There were about 8 to 10 cameras there, including us. And he started talking about some of the things he's done for rural Georgia's health care and hospitals. And then it came the Q&A time. And of course, this was the question that really begged to be asked. And so when we asked Collins, what do you make of some of the things your son-in-law is posting online? Do you denounce them here today? We asked him if David Allen Shear had ever done any work for either Collins' trucking company or video work for his campaign. He didn't answer any of those questions. He said, we've addressed this. And again, that statement was very non-direct to the actual issue at hand. But we assume that's what he's referencing. And then kind of launched into this tirade against his opponent, Senator John Ossoff, saying things like John Ossoff needs to answer for why he wanted men in women's locker rooms and why he cut cash bail and why he raised prices on Georgians. The one name he didn't say was his son-in-law's, David Allen Shear, and he never said anything to the effect of, I denounce what he's been saying online, or, hey, this is a family issue. It really was, we've addressed this. Now I'm going to talk about John Ossoff. He got through his answer, albeit with some difficulty, and then tried to call on one more reporter for a question before he abruptly ended the press conference and walked away. And so, I think a lot of people were very confused by that answer. He didn't address the question at all, to be frank. And of course, this is something that has loomed very large in the last couple of weeks in this campaign for Mike Collins. And it's definitely going to be something that doesn't go away anytime soon. I think this non-answer actually compelled people to have more of an interest in this story, simply because he actually has not addressed it as he said he has. He has not actually specifically addressed any of the things that his son-in-law has been saying online, only that he denounces anti-Semitism and votes pro-Israel, while at the same time, his son-in-law is all over the internet talking about how Israel is responsible for America's problems, comparing Jews to Satan. And so there is clearly a disconnect in the Collins family as to where they stand on this issue. And I think if you were going to put yourself out there and run for U.S. Senate and ask Black, Hispanic, Jewish constituents for your vote, you got to answer the question. People need to know where you stand on this, and it's as simple as that.
Just to sort of, I'm going to read from the statement that the Collins campaign put out. This is a portion of it. He says that the congressman has always condemned all forms of anti-Semitism, including this. I guess that's a reference to his son-in-law's social media postings, and always will condemn anti-Semitism regardless of the source. And we should note that Collins removed a family photo that included the son-in-law from his campaign's website. He said that that was a personal decision when he was asked why he did that by an Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter. But he really has not come out and substantively talked about this. And I don't know what he could say. It is a really tough spot for him. But as you said, I mean, if you're going to run for office and you're going to run for a statewide office the way that he is, you would think that his campaign, would be able to sort of help guide him towards some kind of answer, and some soul searching, I guess, that the candidate himself needs to go through. It seems like if this was his attempt to sort of put this issue to bed yesterday, I don't think that it's going to work. And it's certainly not going to stop his opponent, Senator Jon Ossoff, from continuing to demand that he answer these questions. And Jon Ossoff, has really been, since the CNN reporting, Senator Ossoff has really used this as a real weapon against his opponent. And it seems like as long as this matter is still sort of floating around and there isn't a sufficient response to it, that's going to continue.
Yeah, oil on a fire. I mean, at this point, and I'm not going to play political strategist. I don't know how the Collins campaign is actually trying to run their messaging, but you can get out there and say something to the effect of this is a family matter. I'm not going to talk about it. I appreciate the question, whatever the case may be, but to completely swerve it altogether. I mean, I think we have the leverage to comment on political decisions and how they're viewed by voters. And if that's what we're doing today, then I think it was a very strange move to pivot so hard away from that question. And again, I'm not saying that because we were the ones that asked it. Somebody was going to ask that question. And if that was going to be the answer, I just don't know what the good in that is for the Collins campaign. They faced a lot of controversy in this election cycle. There's no doubt about that. And we've asked about those health ethics investigations and the firing of multiple staffers due to various different things. But certainly this seemed to really hit a note with people. And I'm sure there was probably some hand-wringing going on after that press conference yesterday. But the question needed to be asked. And I think it also needed to be answered. And I guess we'll see what happens coming down the road because this ain't going away.
Talk to us about the Senator Ossoff's, use of this in the campaign. He's held a number of press conferences, virtual press conferences, I guess, including one yesterday where he continued to say that, look, he's got to answer these questions about his son-in-law, and I imagine that's just going to continue. And polls, at least some of the most recent polls show that Senator Ossoff has a pretty significant lead over Collins at this point. We're now 90 plus days out from Election Day.
Yeah, I mean, we hear about October surprises. Well, the Ossoff campaign got a July surprise in their hat, and they're clearly leaning into this very hard. Because it is something that I think, again, they think is important to voters. And of course, Senator Ossoff is the first Jewish sitting senator. And so clearly
from the state of Georgia.
From Georgia, yes. And so, that probably, has some personal implications for him as well, how this is being handled by the Collins campaign. But, in the last couple of weeks since his story broke on CNN, if you asked Ossoff who he liked in the game tonight, he would tell you Mike Collins needs to answer for these questions about his son-in-law. And so they have been hammering this and really encouraging people to stay on this in terms of getting an answer out of Collins. Of course, that's not why we asked the question, but you can bet that the Ossoff campaign is going to ride this all the way until it's not a thing anymore, which could be the end of the campaign cycle. But just in just about every press conference, and he has done many, many of them, he has brought this up and said that it is actually a major issue for voters because, again, people in those camps who stand to really, be hurt by these white nationalist ideals that, the son-in-law is espousing in some of his videos. I think he knows they need to know before they go to the ballot box where Collins stands on this, because you are asking again to be sent to the U.S. Senate. It is the most exclusive exclusive club and the most important body in our country. And so, I think Senator Ossoff knows that this is messaging gold for them, but he is also very serious about getting some sort of response out of Collins on this.
We'll be talking about this with our panel on the record this weekend, this Sunday morning at 11. We're also going to be talking about the Rick Jackson campaign for governor, the billionaire healthcare executive who is running for office for the first time in his life, and who has shown a willingness to spend whatever it takes in order to win. First, the primary, and now the general election. He is fighting obviously against the former mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, the Democrat in the race. And again, we see the campaign, the Jackson campaign, willing to throw money, in an unprecedented way, Doug. This is an ad buy that the campaign announced. You broke the story earlier this week. $87 million in television and digital ads that are going to start running this weekend.
Yeah. And I think, with our panel this week, we'll have a really good discussion about the role that money plays in politics, because it's a big one. They say money talks, and Rick Jackson's got a lot of money. And so you're right. We did break that story last week that this is, to our knowledge, the largest ad buy in a single sitting in Georgia history. It is among one of the largest single ad buys in campaign history in the United States. I think I looked and I could only find two, both of them out of California, where there was actually a six-figure amount spent on a single ad buy. And what this is going to allow Rick Jackson to do is the same thing that he was doing against Burt Jones in the primary, our lieutenant governor, run attack ads. I know a lot of those Rick Jackson ads kind of went viral for, how silly and goofy they were when he's he's a very cerebral guy, and some of those ads kind of tried to bring him out of his shell a little, using his grandkids, using a puppy in one of them. And so that'll be what that money is for. So when you start seeing these digital banners on your, favorite news website, or when you're browsing the web for whatever, and you see that Rick Jackson ad on the side, or when you're watching the game on Friday night and a Rick Jackson or an anti-Keisha ad pops up, that's what that $87 million is going towards. And keep in mind that this is, Rick getting out ahead of this in a sense, because there's only so much airtime, right, in a given cycle. And so if you're spending $87 million to scoop up a lot of that time, voters are going to see more of you. And I think that is kind of the goal here.
Interesting to watch the Bottoms campaign, which really can't compete money-wise, but they are sort of going after Rick Jackson, in what he might consider to be his strength, which is in the question about health care here in the state of Georgia. Rick Jackson, of course, made his fortune working in the healthcare staffing industry. The Bottoms campaign is really using the issue of healthcare, the lack of access to healthcare in rural parts of the state of Georgia, and the unwillingness of Republican lawmakers here in the state, including the governor, for the expansion of Medicaid and Medicare. So that's something that the Bottoms campaign really kind of sees as a potential opening here in this campaign, a way to potentially score some points against Jackson.
Yeah, big time. And it is kind of interesting, that dichotomy between Jackson being a healthcare executive and, Keisha trying to make expanding Medicaid one of her main platforms, running for governor. In fact, as we were talking to Mike Collins out at Monroe County Hospital yesterday, Keisha Lance Bottoms was in Southeast Georgia, also touring a rural hospital down there. Today, as we film this, she is meeting with residents in Bryan County, especially seniors, to talk about healthcare costs and what they can do to bring them down. And so this is a big issue for both campaigns. It's interesting. They actually kind of had the same goals in mind, right? To cheapen rural healthcare and to bolster those systems and to make healthcare more affordable for everyone in general. And so, the one thing that is kind of the sticking point is this expansion of Medicaid. I think a lot of Democrats don't see a version of affordable health care in Georgia without a Medicaid expansion, but Governor Kemp was very unwilling to do it. Maybe if Keisha Lance Bottoms gets in, that'll be something that she does very quickly. But again, this is clearly an issue. We heard just a couple of days ago from some folks out in Livonia, which is about 2.5 hours away here in Atlanta. So it is extremely rural. St. Mary's Hospital there in Livonia had to close their birthing unit last year. And on the 61st anniversary of Medicaid and Medicare, a lot of doctors, nurses, patients, health advocates held a press conference outside St. Mary's and noted that patients now have to drive, expecting mothers, either 45 minutes to Athens or about an hour and a half away to Greenville, South Carolina, which is the nearest birthing unit to those folks here in rural Georgia. And so this has real impacts. And I think to both sides' credit, both Republicans and Democrats recognize this as an issue. They have very different ways of dealing with it.
Another line of attack that we're seeing from the Bottoms campaign is to really point out the way that Rick Jackson has aligned himself so closely with President Trump. They clearly see that as a liability. They think that voters here in Georgia are going to be turned off by Jackson's comments that he will be President Trump's favorite governor, that he would run the state of Georgia the way that President Trump has run the United States. The Jackson team thinks that they can really motivate and convince voters to come out for the former mayor by reminding them that Rick Jackson is toe-to-toe with President Trump.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We've seen John Ossoff and Keisha Lance Bottoms kind of running as a ticket. It can be a huge boon or it can be a huge bust for you as a candidate. And, if Rick Jackson wants to attach his campaign to the administration in the White House, I think that will come with some highs and some lows. We saw President Trump out here last Wednesday. He was in Marietta at a high school, and he brought Rick Jackson up on stage not once but twice, where he really showed his support. But of course, we got to remember that Rick Jackson was not the Trump endorsed candidate. That was Burt Jones. It was done very early on in the campaign cycle, even before Rick Jackson got into the race. We were thinking maybe, well, if, Rick does well, will he switch his endorsement? The president never wavered from Burt Jones, even all the way up until that runoff night. He was endorsing him. And he even said up on stage in Marietta last week, hey, Rick's a good guy. I like the other side a lot, but Rick's a good guy. So there's, of course, still some disconnect, I think, between the Jackson campaign and the Trump administration. They're kind of waiting to see how he runs this race. But, as we get down to it, certainly I think the president would rather have a Republican in office over any Democrat. And so you're going to see a lot of support. I would venture a guess to say that Trump will come down here at least one more time to try and prop up Mike Collins and Rick Jackson in these very high profile races. And, again, it's a risky thing to attach your campaign to someone else's job performance. And that is what Rick Jackson is kind of hedging his bets on here. Will it drive some people away from him at the polls? I don't know. The president is really good at getting people out to the polls. So if he says go, they'll go.
Yeah.
But, I think when Rick Jackson was in this race, and of course, Burt Jones was a Trump endorsed candidate, there were a lot of people who viewed Rick as a more centrist, maybe safer option for those who were not, fully aligned with what the Trump White House was doing. And now that he is kind of picking sides here and putting his foot in Trump's camp, I don't know what happens with those voters.
We shall see. Another topic we're going to be talking about with the panel this week is something that I'm fascinated with, and that is the issue of data centers, the politics of data centers. Georgia has really become one of the hubs here in the U.S. as far as data center construction, and there are plans to build more and more of them here in Georgia. A number of different municipalities have come out and tried to stop the construction of data centers, citing concerns about the environment, concerns about power bills going up for residents, and just to watch how politicians from both parties are navigating this issue is really, really fascinating because, you see on one hand that the people who are against it are some of them are Republicans and some of them are Democrats. It's really not black and white when it comes to, this party is on this side of the issue and this party is on that side of the issue. So it really has created a bit of a puzzle for politicians, Republican and Democrat, to try to figure out how to talk about this issue.
Go down to the Capitol and ask 100 people what their take on data centers is, and you'll get at least 90 different answers. And we saw that play out this year. We saw everything from, protection of data center tax credits to full moratoriums proposed. Of course, none of them passed. Full moratoriums proposed on construction of data centers for some of the proposals were up to a decade from now. So you are all over the gamut on this issue. And I think that for, Democrats, for many people who are opposed to this in general, the environmental concerns, the fact that these are they take up large areas and don't produce a lot of jobs. There's light pollution in neighborhoods. How much water are they using to cool these systems? And, what are they doing with it afterwards? Those are the concerns of the folks who are highly, highly against this. And then I think there's another camp of people who are okay with having data centers or are not concerned about any of those factors, but are worried about what happens to ratepayers who are, basically fronting the cost in some cases of the massive amount of electricity that these data centers require. So you saw, for example, Governor Kemp go down to Washington, D.C. just last week and sign this ratepayers protection pledge, which it really has no teeth to it. It's more symbolic than anything else. A bunch of governors and a bunch of leaders came to D.C. and signed this ratepayer protection pledge.
The idea of it is
saying, that they would not allow these data centers and these large companies that are building them to pass on the cost of the amount of electricity that they need to ratepayers, right? So, say you build one house in your subdivision, maybe a little more electricity, everybody's grid rate goes up a little bit. Now imagine adding, thousands of houses to a subdivision and how much electricity that would require off of that particular section of the grid. That's what we're talking about here with data centers. And of course, somebody's got to foot the bill for that. And so Governor Kemp has been very clear that in his very short time left in office, he will not let any, rate increases be passed on to consumers. He's had lots of talks with Georgia Power about this as well, and they seem to be on board with it. But a couple of months ago, we did see Georgia Power attempt to increase rates to accommodate the almost million gigawatts that it's going to require to build the amount of data centers that they think they want to build in the next couple of years. So I would very much caution ratepayers to pay a lot of attention to this issue because it is going to have some sort of impact on you one way or another, even if you're not paying attention. When you see your electricity bill go up, this could be one of those factors as to why. And so I think this is, again, one of those like rural healthcare issues that affects everyone, but no one really quite knows how to deal with just yet.
Well, a lot to chew on, and we'll be going through all of it this week on The Record. So please join us again, 11 a.m. on Atlanta News First, and streaming anytime wherever you stream. And then you can go back and watch our past shows on our YouTube channel, and you can find us pretty much anywhere. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. For Doug Reardon and our producer, Tim Darnell, I'm Rick Bolbaum. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for watching A&F Plus. For more breaking news, live coverage, and your community stories, download the Atlanta News First app. You can also watch us on YouTube, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. To join the conversation on YouTube Live, visit our channel and hit subscribe. You can also listen to the Atlanta News First podcast by searching Atlanta News First on your preferred listening platform.